Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, copy. Deja vu.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Deja Reviewed podcast, where we talk about the original versions of TV shows that were later rebooted. This is season 1, which we're calling In the Zone, discussing the Twilight Zone. I'm Michael.
And I'm Mark.
And today we're talking about season 1, episode 21, titled Mirror Image. And Mirror Image originally aired on February 26th, 1960. It was directed by John Brahm, which we'll get to that. It was written by Rod Serling, starring Rod Serling, Vera Miles, and Martin Milner.
There is a fifth dimension.
Both shadow and substance of things and
Suddenly up ahead.
You're moving into another dimension.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Okay, here's Rod Serling's opening voiceover for Mirror Image. Millicent Barnes, age 25, young woman waiting for a bus on a rainy November night. Not a very imaginative type is Miss Barnes, not given to undue anxiety or fears, or for that matter, even the most temporal flights of fancy. Like most young career women, she has a generic classification as a, quote, girl with a head on her shoulders, end of quote. All of which is mentioned now because in just a moment the head on Miss Barnes's shoulders will be put to a test. Circumstances will assault her sense of reality, and a chain of nightmares will put her sanity on a block. Millicent Barnes, who in 1 minute will wonder if she's going mad.
And from IMDb, their description is, while waiting in a bus station, Millicent Barnes has this strange feeling that her doppelganger is trying to take over her life. Which,
I don't like that description at all. No. Like, that jumps ahead to like the last 5 minutes of the episode.
Well, right off the bat, though, let's be fair. This episode was one of those Twilight Zone episodes where they just had to explain everything that was happening in the last 5 minutes because none of it made sense up to that point.
Fair enough. It was actually quite an interesting setup. Like, you're with her, like, you know, seeing these, whether they're hallucinations or something else, and, you know, her bag appearing and disappearing and getting glimpses of this person who looks like her. You know, it was definitely one of those things like, wow, I'm really curious to see where this is going. And then, like, they didn't kind of know where they wanted it to go.
Totally agree. Before we jump away from our stats, though, John Brahm, the director of this one, we should know that name.
It's an old favorite of ours.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He did 12 episodes. So far, we've seen The Four of Us Are Dying, which we didn't like, Judgment Night, which I think was one of, if not our favorite episode, and Time Enough at Last, which we also liked. So and frankly, Time Enough at Last is one of those classic episodes.
Well, and even for The Four of Us Are Dying, which we didn't like, we generally liked the direction of it. We thought The issue with that one was the script and kind of source material there not working. But my recollection is we thought some of it was handled pretty interesting stylistically. Particularly, I remember some of the sort of sleight of hand camera tricks where his face would change without the shot changing and stuff like that.
And I would say same for this episode. I think the direction was fine. I had some issues with the plot of it, I suppose.
Well, I think where I'd like to start on this episode, and Mike, I'm really curious what you thought, but we kind of left ourselves with the last episode a little bit of a cliffhanger because it ended with Rod Serling coming on camera, his first on-camera appearance in the Twilight Zone. Remember, at this point, unlike some later seasons, the voiceover is just voiceover is always just narrated. He does not come on screen to do a narration normally. It is just a voiceover. And he came on at the end of the last episode to kind of like punch back at some people who apparently already at the time were saying that he didn't have strong female characters, and said, well, come check out our next episode, and, you know, our character in that and I will disagree, so watch Mirror Image. So he really set a pretty high bar for this, and I have some thoughts, but I'm curious, what did you think in terms of the strong female character and, you know, kind of this being his very explicit, setting it up as a response to some of those criticisms?
Yeah, I first of all, I think it's called clapping back, not punching back in 2020. but
he was punching back. It's 1960.
Yes, for sure. I definitely thought the same. We had the same thoughts, and I think we ended last episode kind of knowing that we were going to go into this one thinking that those thoughts. I really thought that she did a great job. That that Vera Miles did a good job as Millicent Barnes. It was another episode. I think that we talked a lot in The Hitchhiker, where there was a lot of just her having to react to crazy things that were going on around her, and I think she did a really nice job at that. I will say, and this is kind of my first note too, that I think in the opening narration, he's trying to compliment her and play her up by saying she's not prone to flights of fancy and she's a career woman. But then he also goes on to say she's not imaginative, and he basically called her generic with a good head on her shoulders. So, which maybe in 1960 standards, that was the highest compliment that you could pay to a woman, but to me that seemed like, oh, she keeps herself in line. She's like the good housewife. It was very, I think it showed its age, just his description of her right off the bat. I do think she did a good job with this character and acted it very well. I was sort of expecting more of after Serling's setup for this, I was expecting a little bit less of a damsel in distress, and it was kind of just another things are happening to this lead female protagonist, kind of that like we saw in the 16mm Shrine, which I think, and Hitchhiker, which I think were our only two really main female characters driven episodes before. So I think this kind of fell into the same pattern as those, that there was just something happening to her. What did you think?
I am right there with you on everything you said. And I guess just to expand on a couple of those things, you mentioned the other two episodes with female protagonists being 16mm Shrine and The Hitchhiker. I agree. Also, first off, that the actress playing Millicent Barnes did a good job, and very similar to The Hitchhiker. There were some segments where it really is just kind of her face acting, and there's not a lot going on, and so the performance had to be very strong. But yeah, it was another damsel in distress, and all three of these protagonists are, I'm going to put this in very loose quotes because they're in different situations, but they're all crazy. Like, so 16mm Shrine, she wants to go live inside the world of the movie and eventually does that, and she's kind of the most active protagonist of the three, like has this sort of weird dream of what she wants to do and magically sort of makes it happen. But she was also kind of nuts. Hitchhiker, she's dead and doesn't realize it. And this one, I mean, I guess what you would say the twist is that it turns out Millicent was not crazy and her doppelganger did actually exist and she was seeing her. So I guess that sets her apart from the other two, but the whole plot is about them thinking she's crazy. And you mentioned the voiceover, and I couldn't agree more about, this being dated, but I think that lets the Twilight Zone off the hook a little bit. Rod Serling's, on-camera appearance in the last episode tells us this was not just, because it's something we've discussed, kind of the gender roles on the show. And the fact that he came on camera and did that tells me this was not just us looking back from 2020 saying like, oh, well, they... I guess that's how, they thought of women at that time, because clearly they were getting pushback at the time. And so I think it's, I think we want to recognize that it's from a different historical moment, but also that this is not just us looking back on it and seeing these issues, that they were clearly apparent to at least some people writing into the show back in 1960. And the thing about, a generic classification as a, quote, girl with a head on her shoulders, end of quote, I found really, demeaning, and particularly in an episode where he's foregrounded like, well, we'll show you we can do a good woman character. Like, that is not a good look to open your show with if that's the point you're trying to make.
This is a really good point, and it leads to another question. Do you think, in talking about 1960s gender issues, do you think this episode solved it? Do you think that people were satisfied with it? Because is this the people that wrote into him, or that he addressed that had written to him at the end of the last episode, and then he comes out with this episode, do you think they're like, oh, good, he did it? Or do you think it's like, oh, wait a minute, Because to me, it's like, was this satisfactory for 1960? Was this what they wanted to see? Or were they still like, well, he proved our point, essentially? I mean, I don't know that we can answer it, but it's something to think about.
I can't say what those people would think, but I think it's an interesting question. And I mean, my best guess, trying to put myself in their shoes, if you're somebody who, based on the episodes of Twilight Zone we had seen up to that point, felt compelled to write in and talk about the way that female characters were handled, or kind of the lack of female protagonists, or whatever the specific details what they're writing in terms of the gender roles. If I was somebody who cared enough to do that and had seen all the prior episodes, I have a hard time thinking this would assuage those fears. I think it would, like you said, more confirm it than anything. And even structurally, she is ostensibly the protagonist, but she doesn't get to finish off the story. We kind of have to transition it over to this male character who's, calls the police and has them come take her away in this very bizarre thing where, like, the police car, like, rolls up, the police get out, don't ask any questions, say anything, they just sort of grab her, throw her in the back of the car, nod at the guy, and drive away. Like, what if that was just a different couple waiting outside there, and they just grab the wife and drive away?
I had the exact same note. They literally roll up and just grab the first woman that they see and throw her in the... Don't say anything. She doesn't say anything. They just throw her in the back of the car and drive away. That was crazy.
Well, but and let's be clear too. I think that's a very gendered thing. Like, I cannot imagine them like driving up and just grabbing some guy because some other guy who doesn't, some other strange guy from the bus depot calls the police, says, "Hey, there's this guy who's acting kind of crazy." Are they going to just pull up, grab the first guy they see, and throw her in? I mean, I think that was highly gendered.
Well, it depends on the skin color of the guy.
Well, that's okay. Fair enough. There are racial, ethnic, gender, every sort of it, but it's very much dependent on your social identity. And they would not have come and grabbed a white guy in a suit the same way without saying anything. So I really think this one dropped the ball pretty dramatically. And even if the previous episode hadn't ended with that, I don't even know what to call it, that sort of response from Serling drawing our attention to those things in this episode, I think we would still have been talking about the kind of gender issues going on here, as we've talked about in previous issues of the Twilight Zone. But man, to sort of set this up as, okay, this is the one where we're going to prove you wrong. I mean, it really feels pretty tone deaf about Serling, and we've praised him a lot, I think rightly, for the what he does with the show in general, and particularly a lot of the progressive ideas and some of the anti-war stuff, and obviously his writing itself, and all that praise is well deserved. But I wonder if this is, we'll have to see more episodes, but I wonder if this is a blind spot to him, because it just feels really off to think this was the episode that was going to prove those haters wrong.
Yeah. And I know we should probably move away from this, but something I wanted to address that you said, I guess, in thinking about whether this would please the people that had written in complaining, they also most likely saw The Hitchhiker and saw 16mm Shrine. And considering this character is basically the same as those two characters, I can imagine it did not satisfy them.
Yeah. One of the things I'd throw out, just because it ties back to The Hitchhiker, these are also the only two characters we've seen who get an internal narration.
Yes. I made that note too. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a small enough sample size that I don't want to necessarily say at this point we have evidence is strictly a gendered thing, but there is something interesting about, the male protagonists tend to get more agency. And I was thinking about, okay, in one sense, this is the Twilight Zones. Okay, we've seen 3 female protagonists who are all crazy or being treated as if they're crazy. And certainly we've seen male protagonists in the Twilight Zone as well, being crazy or treated as if they're crazy.
For sure.
But not all of them. So on the one hand, we have 100% batting average on that, or a 0%, depending on how you want to look at it. Yeah. 0% sanity. And, the men, we've seen that as an occasional thing, but we've also seen a lot of them like having agency, or they're the ones making the deal with the devil, which, funny to say, that's a recurring thing, or
right.
talking to death and stuff. And the females keep getting put in these situations where there's something happening to them and they can't understand it, and they're crazy or whatever. And I mean, it really, I know one of our overarching themes for Deja Reviewed as a whole, and something we plan to talk about on different shows when we talk about different shows at some point in the future, is like, how do these things hold up, and are these relevant today? And I think this is one of the things that, at this point, we're more than half a season in, and we have the rare opportunity that we've actually seen the show explicitly kind of call out people criticizing it for this and trying to respond. I think this is one of the things where we just have to say, the Twilight Zone is the original iteration of it does not hold up in terms of how it's viewing, gender dynamics and identity politics.
Well, and the last kind of problematic thing, I think, for all three of the main female protagonists we've seen is that who comes in and kind of swoops in and explains to her that she's crazy or like gets her arrested. It's a guy every time that in 16 millimeter Shrine, it's her agent or whatever that like kind of is like, well, I guess she just lost it. And then in Hitchhiker, I guess she does figure out that she's dead eventually, but the sailor comes in and is trying to protect her because she's acting crazy. And then of course in this one, it's the guy that comes and sits with her and gets her arrested, essentially. Paul Grinstead was that character's name that is like, well, and I will say, I'll give this episode some credit. This is another one where they actually tried to be like, what's the rational explanation for this? Someone's playing a prank on you. Someone looks like you. There's like your doppelganger or whatever. It was, of course, none of that, and I still don't understand exactly what was happening, and we can get to that. But I agree that it's whether it be Twilight Zone specific or whether it be that this era was still this tone deaf about gender dynamics, it definitely is noticeable in 2020 rewatching it.
And that's an interesting question that we'd have to do more research on, which I'll leave to you because we know my theme is I refuse to do any research on this. But I think we talked about that in earlier episodes and really kind of thought, well, I guess this is something where society has changed. And my viewpoint after last week's episode really kind of shifted a bit. And I'm like, okay, I'm sure like 100% there were societal differences that also have changed. But the fact that they were getting enough kind of response for Serling to respond to it and then still respond with this, I'm really shifting a larger percentage of that blame to the show itself than just to the era, which I think we had maybe kind of deferred to that more in some of our earlier discussions.
I think that's fair.
One of the thing I want to note about what you said with the guy coming in and saving her, very much as saving her is the wrong word, kind of like explaining things and trying to solve the situation. This was another one that reminded me of the Hitchhiker in that she encounters this stranger who's kind of like overly friendly and trying to help her, and that I think in 2020 we were very much suspicious of the guy in a way that, this did have a kind of more innocent feel era to it. I'm thinking of the sailor in Hitchhiker or Paul in this one. And yes, he ends up getting her arrested. So I think there's definitely some issues going on there that we can talk about, but he's trying to do the right thing. Right. He's not trying to assault her or anything. That very much, if you saw this same setup in 2020, you're like, oh, this guy's up to something.
I'll tell you who was not a friendly stranger. The ticket taker at the bus station had some of the funniest Twilight Zone lines. I know we've called out kind of some funny lines, but at one point he goes, why don't you go back to your seat and sit down and breathe through your nose? He literally calls her a mouth breather. And, at first he's like super aggressive to her because she goes to ask like when the bus is late, and she asks when the bus is getting in, and he goes after her right away. And I'm like, why is this guy so? But then you realize that she keeps coming up, or her doppelganger keeps coming up and asking him the same questions over and over again. So this cantankerous old man is like basically yelling at her to leave him alone. And go sit down and breathe through your nose. And when the bus comes here, there'll be the sound of an engine, door opening, people coming in, and you'll know the bus is here. There were some really funny lines by the guy, the bus station attendant.
Yeah, and you got the feeling that guy was kind of a crotchety old man to start with, and even
Sure.
if she hadn't been up multiple times, he was not going to be the friendliest. I did like that structurally as a kind of setup because the very first thing is like, wow, this clerk is really a dick, and then we start to understand that yes, he clearly is regardless, but start to understand that like no. He's responding in part to the fact that he's been getting these repeated inquiries from her that she hasn't. And this is one, we've talked about some differences in different Twilight Zone episodes where, we're either with the characters or ahead of them, or they reveal the twist at the beginning or not till the end. And this I thought was a nice one. Again, the resolution, not as successful, but in terms of the setup and kind of getting us into it, in really putting us in Millicent's place, and we're with her trying to figure out what's going on, and we have kind of access to the same information or lack thereof as she does, and so kind of the same. I liked how that put us in her perspective of she doesn't understand why this guy's being such a jerk, and then when he's like, "Yeah, and you've been up here asking," we're like, "Oh wait, she has. Wait, this is weird. What's going on?" So I liked how that. Put the audience in her shoes.
And I hope when you're saying understand that you're putting it heavily in air quotes, because can we get to the fact that none of this, so what it ultimately ends up being is that she has a doppelganger, I guess, and so does Paul Winston. There's a crossover of dimensions where these doppelgangers are essentially coming in. It was a very Invasion of the Body Snatchers. These doppelgangers are coming in and taking over essentially for them. But none of the events that actually happened in the bus station made sense if that's what was going on. Because if there was a doppelganger, why was the doppelganger continuing to go up and talk to the guy? Why did they keep checking her bag and unchecking her bag? Like, none of it actually made sense. If there was like a time loop thing going on, which is kind of what I thought was happening, or something like that, then all of these weird things that are happening to Millicent would have made sense. But with a doppelganger, nothing made sense at the end of the episode.
Well, and the very end is Paul chasing after his doppelganger in a sort of bad split screen superimposition. But yeah, I had the same issue with that. Like, if the doppelgangers are trying to take over or get rid of their counterparts in this world, which is, they very explicitly say this is, that says the counterpart has to replace us and take over to survive. Like, I think that's the exact dialogue or something very close to that. Then why is he running away? Like, the doppelganger should be stopping and like trying to like kill him or something.
Right. And why? If it was Millicent's doppelganger that we literally, she goes to the bathroom at one point, and this is why it's called mirror image. She looks in the mirror and she sees herself or her doppelganger sitting back in the train station or the bus station. But then her doppelganger arrives on the bus that she's been waiting for this whole time. Unless there's multiple doppelganger, none of it made any sense as far as sci-fi goes to me.
And the doppelganger in the bus, which there was, again, I will praise the structure of maybe the first 2/3 of it. When they go out to the bus and she's about to get on and looks up and sees the doppelganger in the bus window that she's already on the bus, and like Millicent freaks out and runs away. And then right before the commercial break, kind of pushes in on the doppelganger, and the doppelganger's like looking back and like smiling, like, haha, I caused some mischief or something here. Which was like this setup that then is never followed through on, because otherwise, you're right. Like, the doppelganger seemed to just be doing the same things Millicent would have been doing, checking with the bus clerk, checking her bag, whatever. I want to throw out too. I by the way, when you said time loop, I was right there with you. I thought this was going to be something playing with time, really till that point where the whole episode stops for Millicent to give a long explanation of what has apparently been happening. But up till that point, I still thought it was going to be something to do with a time loop or some sort of multiverse, like overlapping thing where she was like phasing in and out of the dimensions. But so Millicent gives this big explanation about the multiverse and, that we could each have copies in these different things. That, okay, it's a jump from where they were, but also it's the Twilight Zone. So at some point, somebody has to kind of make a jump and give this explanation. And it kind of, it seemed, I'm going to put in air quotes, reasonable, like within our understanding of physics, metaphysics, multiverses, like, okay, that the idea that I was willing to go with her on that. but then goes into this very specific thing of like, and sometimes they come over into our universe and they have to take over our life to survive. I'm like, I've read a lot of multiverse stuff in work on our time travel project, and I'm also just interested in quantum physics and stuff. I've never heard even like the weirdest conspiracy theory about that. Like, you're right, it's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but they're kind of like grafting that onto some sort of actual physics concept in this very weird way. And she like jumps to this one very specific interpretation of it. And I was like, even as somebody who buys into this multiverse thing, you lost me there.
Totally agree. And we'll take a break right after this. But also one of the weirdest things about that is that she goes, when she leads into this whole explanation, she's like, I heard about this a long time ago, about these two planes of existence, and leads in with this super bizarre, like what you were reading, like you just said, who has actually read a lot of this stuff or like is interested in this stuff. Where did you hear about these multiverses and these doppelgangers coming in and taking over people? It was very, very strange and kind of ham-fisted.
It's the kind of thing that today she would have been reading on some like weird alt-right Facebook page or something. But like, I'm not sure where she would have found that. And she said it was like long ago, and she's 25. So was this like her bedtime story when she was like 8? Like, totally. All right, little Millicent, today we're going to read about the doppelgangers taking over your life from another universe. Billy the doppelganger.
Totally agree.
Like.
Let's take a quick break and we'll keep talking about Mirror Image.
All right, welcome back from the break. We are still talking about Mirror Image, episode 21 of season 1 of The Twilight Zone. And Mike, before we moved on too far from the obnoxious, crotchety old man clerk, I just had to make one thing that struck me as we were watching it and referenced back to an earlier Twilight Zone episode, one of our favorites, Time Enough at Last. He has this line there where he goes, will you sit down and let me read my magazine? And I just thought, man, this guy would not fare well at the bank where Henry Bemis worked in Time Enough at Last, where he wanted to just sit down and read instead of doing his job. And I like here, instead of the customer is always right, the clerk is literally like, customer needs to shut up and stop asking me to tell her things that are part of my job so I can sit here and read my magazine.
I also think he's a little bit of a perv, because at one point he goes to the guy, to Paul Grimstead, he's like, what, you got a thing for sick people? When he's talking about trying to help the girl, which I thought was super weird. He also has a very weird line that I had to replay a bunch of times. He goes, I'd as leave she got out of here somehow. When Paul Grinstead, because he's like, I'm going to call the police or do something. And the old man just goes, I'd as leave she got out of here somehow. That, as far as I could tell, was the direct quote. That must be a 1960 colloquialism, but I was like, what?
Well, this guy was already an old guy in 1960, so maybe it's like a 1920s.
Good point. I what he meant was, I'd just as soon she got out of here somehow, but I'd never heard it phrased that way. It was very, very strange.
But that guy was like the least customer service oriented person we have seen in any episode. And yeah, I your line about him being kind of pervy, I also kind of got the sense like it would just never occur to him to try to help anybody.
Yes.
So he's like, what's this guy up to, like trying to do good for somebody? I don't follow.
Agreed. Since we're on the topic of old men, can we talk about
That's a great
Can we talk about the acting of the guy? So after Millicent sees her reflection in the bathroom mirror, she comes back out and there's this old couple sitting there, and the man is sleeping on his wife's, he's got his head resting on his wife's chest, and she's having a conversation with the woman, basically being like, hey, did you see anyone here that looks like me? And at a very, I don't know if the director yelled act, the old man's like, what's going on here? And it's some of the worst acting, and I know we've kind of ripped on the Twilight Zone acting. It's some of the worst acting that we've seen, I feel like, in the Twilight Zone. And he comes up, he's like, oh, I don't know about anything about that. And he just goes back to sleep. And it was just straight up awful. It was awful acting by that old guy.
You know, I was thinking when she goes over to the sleeping couple, who I did not go back and look, but I would have sworn they were not there in some of the earlier shots.
I'm almost positive they
just
weren't.
appeared there. But that would involve doing some research and checking earlier shots to find out. But both that part and then when Paul first comes over, before it's clear that he's going to be a main character in the second half of the episode, when it just seemed like it was another sort of, random stranger checking in on her. I will say both those interactions kind of struck me very much of the current moment with the sort of wariness of strangers and social distancing and fear of sickness or contagion. Like when she goes over to the sleeping couple and the guy's kind of, I agree the acting's bad, but I think part of it is kind of like put out like, what is this person doing over here bothering us? And then when Paul comes over and sits like way too close to her and he's like, forgive me, miss, you're not ill, are you? Like, I don't know, both of those kind of resonated with me in a way like I can't see anyone, and maybe not anyone in just modern times anyway. I think people are much more hesitant to talk to strangers, period. But certainly like right now, like you have this giant empty bus depot and like why somebody getting right up in my face? And like Paul comes and sits down next to her on the bench and there's like 100 empty benches and he's like a foot from her.
Well, that's because he has a thing for sick people.
Well, that's why he was asking, you're not ill, are you? He's like hoping she is.
Exactly.
And then it turns out she's not. He's like, well, I guess I'll help her anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree. Also, it's, while we're on the topic of Paul, when he comes back in and he's explaining again, these cops have amazing timing that was kind of addressed that Paul takes her outside. The cops roll up like a couple seconds later, just grab her, throw her in the car. She doesn't really say, she doesn't even kind of exclaim anything. She just kind of gets in the car. Paul comes back in and is talking to the old man, and he's like, well, what are they going to do? He's like, well, they're going to take her to the hospital for observation. It's like, how the hell do you know? Like, they didn't say anything. These cops just took her in, and it was so strange. So strange.
How do you even know those are actual cops? I had a moment where I thought this whole thing, I was thinking of the David Fincher film The Game that we've talked about in a previous episode. I was thinking that Paul and the cops and like everybody was involved in some sort of elaborate, I'm not sure what, like, but an elaborate thing to trick Millicent for some reason. And I couldn't figure out what that reason would be. And then it turned out it wasn't true. But like, I could easily see like those were not actual cops. It was just like two people posing as cops to like rob banks or something, like, hey, let's like kidnap a woman while we're here. Okay. And Paul's like, you guys take her. And the guy nods. Like, all right.
We were going to, but thank you for the permission. I want to.
Speaking of inappropriate legal and law enforcement things, did you notice that they loaded Paula and Millicent both load their bags on the bus, then don't get on, and the bus leaves? I'm like, man, if they were terrorists, that's a great scheme.
I did not notice that. That's a good point. I'm going to give a couple of shout outs to this episode since we've kind of been trashing it a little bit. But the one...
This is an ongoing theme in our episodes as well.
Yeah.
First we'll trash it, then we should probably say something nice.
So one thing, just the I've been in situations similar to this, but the idea of being holed up in a nice, cozy looking, with a cigarette machine, a nice, cozy looking bus station at 2 a.m. on a rainy night. There is something super romantic and cozy about the whole setup of the thing. Obviously, it was not old school at the time, but to us, it's a very old school looking bus station. I thought was kind of neat. And I did like, I don't know that this was, let me just ask you this. Do you think this was a real-time episode? Because I think it was.
I think it was close. I don't think they explicitly went for that, and there's times where they kind of jump time a little bit, particularly when she faints.
Oh, I forgot about that.
But yeah, I mean, yes, it's largely real time.
Because there's a clock behind the counter, behind the old man, and I was watching it because this always bothers me in shows, and it was progressing at about the same rate as the episode. I wasn't keeping a specific time, but this was the closest I think that we've seen to a real-time episode, which I thought was kind of neat.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the clock because I noticed that as well and thought that they did a really good job of keeping the hands moving forward and this sense of time progressing. And that's something that it would have been very easy to not put a clock on the wall and not have to deal with that. But that's also something I thought was realistic to the production design. Like when you're at whether it's an airport, train station, bus depot, or whatever, people are very conscious of the time and when things are leaving or arriving. So it would make sense to have a clock there. And I thought it was a nice touch to try to keep it moving in relatively real time.
And then, considering this episode was called Mirror Image, I would say that this is the best use of a mirror that we've actually seen in the Twilight Zone. I thought it was neat that she looks in the mirror, you see her looking in the mirror, and then her doppelganger in the lobby when the door swings open. Or she's holding the door open, I guess. I thought that was really neat. That was probably my favorite use of a mirror since, and when the sky was open, when the one pilot, we don't even see what's happening in the mirror, but he sees something bad happening to himself in the mirror, like he's fading away or something. We don't really know what he saw, but I thought that this was the best use of a mirror that we've seen in the Twilight Zone that someone hasn't run into.
I was going to say, clearly the best use is where is everybody when the guy just runs headlong into the mirror.
So I do want to get some
It still cracks me up, your comment about that. Like, even if you didn't know it was a mirror, if you saw somebody, would you just try?
Well, that's the old Seinfeld joke about birds flying into mirrors and windows. Because like even the bird, I don't want to steal his jokes because the bird would obviously veer out of the way of the other bird, right? As it's flying toward the window.
Yeah, that was so good. Good use of a mirror. It's actually almost identical to the shot in The Fever when he's in his hotel room and looks and sees the slot machine coming through the door. Except like in this case, it like makes sense and is actually like suspenseful instead of just bizarre and cheesy. But it's almost the same shot and kind of like angle and like look back at that. What we're talking about the restroom. This was one I thought was. I know I often have an interest in kind of whether the episodes are predictable or not and how much I care about that. Like there have been some that have been pretty predictable and still really interesting because of the characters and the character moments. When as soon as Millicent goes into the restroom, there's this cleaning lady in there, and the cleaning lady kind of like just gives her a look and like, all right, so we are definitely going to find out she was just in here, and that's why the cleaning lady thinks it's weird that she keeps coming in. And I was like, this whole episode can't be 20 minutes of just her finding out she already did things before, right? There's got to be some kind of payoff. And it turned out it wasn't just 20 minutes of finding out she did things before, but without really the payoff.
Yeah.
I think I also thought at that point maybe she just had some sort of short-term memory loss. But then that felt a little not Twilight Zone enough to me. But I was thinking kind of Memento-ish, like that she's going through these repeated motions and just doesn't know that she keeps doing it.
Yeah, and I actually took a note that I do think this could have been an interesting concept. There is no way they could have executed this in 22 minutes without basically coming out and explaining like they did. And none of it made sense. This might have been an interesting episode if they would have waited to do it when they moved to hour-long episodes, because maybe they could have shown it to us instead of just telling us what happened. But it was really disappointing to me.
But I think that I agree with you on that, and I think it's the premise itself, and the sort of situation where she keeps seeing this alter ego of herself is, I think, a really great setup and good fodder for a feature film,
right?
Like where you have time to explain and play that out more. So I'm with you on that, and I guess we, to some degree, can excuse some of it in like they're trying to cram in whatever they can in 22 minutes, so they have to just have somebody come in and explain. But I think whether this was 22 minutes or a feature, the problem here is they didn't have the sense of like what that payoff was going to be. What's the sort of resolution to this that feels
satisfying,
like a sense of closure and satisfying. And that wasn't a shortcoming of the fact that they just had somebody like lay out all this explanation. That was a shortcoming of they didn't have a plan for what that was going to be.
True. Very true.
And I'm trying to think, I feel like I've seen a bunch of movies over the years that kind of start with this premise where like there's somebody, you see somebody who looks exactly like you.
Okay, well, can I, other than Invasion of the Body Snatchers, this is a good segue into, I've been actually trying to pay attention to the trivia section of IMDb for these last few episodes.
Okay.
I don't think this is where I got this specific nugget, but apparently Jordan Peele said that this episode was part of his inspiration for Us, which I haven't seen yet, but if you've seen it, maybe you can address that.
I have not seen it, but I know that in that people have doppelgangers.
Okay, well then that's it.
Well, and another recent thing, which was not good, was Gemini Man.
Oh, I did not see that.
With Will Smith and the young Will Smith.
Oh boy.
Which again, that was there was an interesting premise to be had there. that I don't know was quite followed through on. The interesting thing about that one really was the sort of technology they did to build this young Will Smith. So they had like current Will Smith performing all this stuff. And I had sort of assumed when I first heard about that they were going to do some kind of de-aging, like what they did in The Irishman or what is done to like every older actor and actress in every movie. There's actually an interesting thing. There are companies who specialize in that who are not credited in the credits because the actor, like it's in the contracts because
They don't want to know.
They don't want to know that the actors have been de-aged.
Well, they should have done that for the guy that showed up in the 16 millimeter shrine. And she's like, "You're so old."
Well, they didn't have that technology back then. And really just if they would have given him contacts, that would have helped out a lot. But the Gemini Man, what was interesting is they didn't do that. They instead built an entire digital Will Smith, and I was watching some behind the scenes stuff about it in interviews with the effects team because as a visual effects thing, it was pretty groundbreaking what they were able to do with it, even if the movie was not up to that level. And it was funny, like they were talking about looking at that they had like on the wall like photos from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and stuff to see like what did Will Smith look like at this age, so that they could try to match all those things right. And I'll say the effect was actually pretty convincing.
Wow,
it was really well done creating this young Will Smith. Part of the issue with it was though, I almost feel like it would have been more effective with another actor. And Will Smith has definitely aged. Like he does not look like he did when he was Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Sure. But he's aged really well.
Yeah, he still
like,
looks
so it wasn't
youngish.
like this. It wasn't like somebody who looks old and somebody who looks young. It was like someone who looks young and someone who looks like still kind of a young adult. He has a very boyish face to him.
For sure.
So it was not as striking as it could have been. But the effect was cool, and it was really interesting to hear how they did that and the work that went into it. It was also a very bizarre from a filmmaking technical standpoint. And Mike, I know you know, I don't know if our listeners will, that one of the things that I study is sort of exhibition formats, and I worked a lot on surround sound and kind of how changes in surround sound technology were affecting filmmaking, but I've also done work on other stuff in terms of literally how movies are exhibited. And this was this really bizarre one where the director, I think it was Ang Lee again. We were just talking about him in Brokeback Mountain in another episode. Whoever the director was, and I really think it was Ang Lee, had that like wanted this to be shown in 3D in full 4K resolution at 120 frames per second, which for reference is 5 times the normal frame rate. So he had this like, they made the movie for this very specific exhibition format that literally no theater in the world was capable of showing. And so they released the movie, and like you could choose from several different ways to see it that were all like approximations of what he wanted. Like, well, we got the high frame rate and the 3D, but we can't show that in 4K because our projectors can't handle it. Or we'll do it in 4K and 3D, but not at high frame rate. And it was just this bizarre thing, like making this movie for a format that like literally no one will ever see the movie in. Like, I'm not even sure if Ang Lee was ever able to see the movie in that format. I mean, maybe in the studio they had some special setup rig that allowed him to view it like that. But I'm like, that just boggled my mind, because I know when I talk with people in the industry about exhibition formats, they're always super conscious of that. And like in surround sound, one of the limitations for a long time of people sort of doing more interesting things with surround technology was knowing that not every theater would be able to hear it. So like you can't say, all right, we're going to make it absolutely crucial to the plot that you hear this sound out of like the right rear of the theater. And that's really important because they knew not everyone would hear it that way. So then they kind of like put, thinking like bumper bowling, put, guiders on the side of them and didn't allow themselves to do things sort of as aggressively as they might otherwise. And this was like the complete opposite. Like, this is what I'm making it for, and I don't care if it doesn't exist. Everyone should see it this way, even though you can't.
I did look it up while you were talking. You are correct. It is Ang Lee that directed that. Yeah, that makes me think of like when 4K or when HD TV came out, and it's like, well, yeah, but not all the content is there. And like when now the 4K is out, it's like, yeah, that's great, and you can get a great, nice, expensive 4K TV, and 20% of your content's actually going to be in 4K at this point. So it.
Well, at this point, if you want to blow a lot of money, you can get an 8K TV, and I'm honestly not sure I assume somewhere there is some public content you can get, but I have no idea what it is or how you would get it. I mean, to the best of my knowledge, if you get an 8K TV right now, there's nothing to watch.
Use your stimulus check on it.
Well, I mean, you could use your stimulus check to buy the TV, but that's not going to buy you 8K content. Like, I don't know where that is. I think there have been a couple of nature documentaries as sort of like test things that exist in, like, there is 8K footage out there, but I think, like, as John Q. Public or Jane Q. Public, I'm literally not sure there's anything you could get and actually watch in 8K on.
Well,
your
I'm
TV.
also guessing that stimulus check will get you what, the remote control for an 8K TV, probably.
If that.
So, do you want to hear these nuggets of trivia?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so Serling apparently claimed that this was based on one of his real life experiences, which I'm super curious. I would love to hear what that experience was.
I want to see that episode.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. What was your experience? You saw a guy that looked like you at a bus station? And then the cities mentioned in this episode, and they were Cortland, since it's a bus station, they're making these announcements. Cortland, Syracuse, Tully, and Binghamton are all along Highway 11 in upstate New York. And that's an homage by Serling because he was born in Syracuse, lived in Binghamton. And then when he was in Hollywood, he still had his home in Binghamton. So that was why that was. Thank you, IMDb, for those little nuggets of information. I thought those were interesting.
All right.
Do you want to hear closing narration? Do you have any final thoughts?
I don't think I have anything else important. I do want to just get us back.
None of this is important.
All
Just
important, Mike. I want to get it back to kind of where we started with this, with the gender dynamics and stuff. And I do just think there's something that I don't know that we've explicitly mentioned on this podcast, but is worth bringing up as we were talking about the few female protagonists and kind of how they've been treated and what those characters have been. That there's this, long-standing trope of the hysterical, non-logical female. And I really think we keep seeing Serling playing right into that instead of playing against it and being, more progressive, as he often does in other things. We were talking in the Purple Testament a couple episodes ago about how you made a great comment about how in Vietnam movies, like that's sort of that's the common trope, is the like sort of inanity of it, and why are we here and that sort of thing. But that World War II movies have often had a sort of place of not necessarily war is good, but like that it's a just
Heroism.
war and heroism, and we're doing this for a good cause. And that he was even kind of ripping that away and making this, in this World War II scenario where the characters are like, well, I guess we're supposed to take this bridge, Lord only knows why, and really kind of critiquing that view. So he's been so progressive in a lot of ways, and this is one where he really is just, I think, having problems getting out of that more classic, in a negative sense, like sort of old-fashioned mindset and stereotype.
The only time that the hysterical female stereotype worked was in Airplane, when everyone lines up to slap the hysterical woman. That's the only time that gimmick has actually worked. And yeah, but I do agree with you. I think that's a good way to wrap up.
Well, and I think we can tie that even into the police, because that was historically, like, you can have somebody put in the madhouse for being hysterical, and
right.
And by people I mean put women in the madhouse for being hysterical, and we're literally seeing that play out again here.
And let's be honest, they're just annoyed with the way that we were treating them at the time. They're not being hysterical, they're just annoyed, and they're probably justifiably annoyed. So should we hear the closing narration?
Yeah.
Here's our closing narration. Obscure metaphysical explanation to cover a phenomenon. Reasons dredged out of the shadows to explain away that which cannot be explained. Call it parallel lines or just insanity. Whatever it is, you find it in the Twilight Zone. Which
I think it's parallel planes, not parallel lines, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say lines? I meant planes. Call it parallel planes or just insanity. Yeah. So again, he's talking, we were just talking about it. He's talking about her insanity, and I love how he right off the bat kind of admits obscure metaphysical explanation to cover a phenomenon. It's like, here's our bullshit excuse for what actually happened in this episode.
I think you could take the first sentence of that and just do it as a critique of the screenplay. Well, at the end, there's an obscure medical explanation to cover a phenomenon that cannot be explained by anything that happened in the plot.
Agreed.
Yeah. But I guess you find it in the Twilight Zone.
You do. Yeah, which is also another tacked on, that felt like another tacked on reference to the Twilight Zone.
Agreed.
Should we rate our sweat level?
Yeah, so I didn't notice a lot of sweatiness. I am going to use that as an opportunity to comment on Paul's raincoat, which I have no idea what material that is, but it was like super distracting, and I just spent all this time staring at it because it looked like it was supposed to be some kind of like weird space age new fabric, but he just pulled it out of the box and it was all still like wrinkled and folded. It was very bizarre, but I didn't see a lot of sweat. I did just see some rain, so I'm going to give this like a 1.
Yeah, I had a 0 because I didn't see any. It all seemed it was just rain.
I'm fine with 0 if our scale goes down to there.
Good
it does
point.
Now.
Does it?
I don't know.
I'm going to have to
whatever the low end of the scale is, it's that. Let's move on.
Okay. And then what do you think about this episode? What's your
I would like to, I'll give a rating and we'll reserve the right to change it because you've been really good the past few episodes about like giving some context, like, well, here's some other things we gave those ratings to.
Yes.
But I'm going to give this, I think, like a 2 because I was into, like, I thought the setup was interesting. There was some really, I was with Millicent, like, what the hell is going on here? But it was kind of a setup with no worthwhile payoff. I thought the switch to Paul as the main character kind of 3/4 of the way through was just weird and I didn't kind of go along with it. And I was really disappointed in kind of how the episode wrapped up. So I'm giving it, I'm not giving it a 1 because I did like the setup, but I didn't like a whole lot else.
I think this is the first time that we're spot on because I also said 2. You're right about our sweat levels. We have only gone down to 1 so far, so we're going to call it a 1. And then, so just to give you some context for other around the 2, I guess we don't have any other 2s, but 2.5s were The Hitchhiker, which I did like better than this, and Walking Distance, which I definitely like better than. Walking Distance, which I definitely like better than this. Escape Clause was a 1.5, which I think is fair to be slightly lower than this one because at least I liked the main character and it was a better, and frankly, it was a more interesting idea, even though it was not paid off or executed well. So I think a 2 is very apt.
Yeah, and I think with that context, I'll also stick with a 2 because it was better than Escape Clause and worse than Hitchhiker and Walking Distance.
We also 1.5s were What You Need and The Four of Us Are Dying, which I think that this is better than both of those episodes too.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, What You Need, I maybe would have rated higher than like Escape Clause and The Four of Us Are Dying, but they're all definitely in that low tier.
I think we might have been a little harsh on Walking Distance in hindsight because I feel like that's a classic episode. But the 2 point,
we might need to retcon that up to
probably,
like a 3.
But not right now. Are you ready to guess what's going on next week? I'm very excited about this episode.
My guess is we will all still be social distancing.
Yeah, well, and actually, this is apparently a very appropriate episode for it. Not to give you any hints, but...
Oh, is this the one that came up on the Twitter feed, and you were like, oh, this one's coming right up?
This is The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, which I think if you gave that title to a lot of people, they would know that that's a Twilight Zone episode. That's how well known apparently this episode is.
Okay, well, I don't know that episode, but I have a little bit of context from just seeing that people saying like, oh, this is relevant to the pandemic. So I'm going to say it's something with like small town undergoing some sort of pandemic and people start to turn on each other and we are the monsters.
We shall see. That is coming up next week. So again, this is on American Netflix if you guys want to watch along with us. Thank you all for listening. This was Deja Reviewed. As we just said, next week's episode is episode 22 of season 1 of The Twilight Zone, titled The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. Feel free to leave us a rating and a comment wherever you're listening to us. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe, because that helps us out a lot. Or you can find us at dejareviewed.com, and there you can leave us a voicemail or a text message, and we hope that you tune in next week.
Deja Reviewed.